Today I'm going to talk to you guys about the senior nominees and whether or not they should be going into the Pro Football Hall of Fame class of 2024. So the senior nominee finalists for the class of 2024 include Randy Gradishar, Steve McMichael, and Art Powell. I'm going to go one by one, going through each of the names and just reading off some accomplishments in determining whether or not these players should be in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. We'll start with Art Powell. So Art Powell played in 1959 with the Philadelphia Eagles as a defensive back and return specialist. Then he went over to the American Football League in 1960 and played with the New York Titans. Nowadays, they're the New York Jets. But from 1960 to 1962, Art Powell played with the New York Titans as an end or receiver nowadays. From 1963 to 1966, he played with the Oakland Raiders. And 1967, he went and played with the Buffalo Bills. And in 1968, his final year, he played with the Minnesota Vikings. Powell played 10 seasons, went to four all AFL All-Star games. He was given all AFL honors 6 times. He is on the AFL all-time team on the second team. He did lead the AFL in receiving yards in 1962 and 1963. He led the AFL in receiving touchdowns in 1960 and 1963. He has 5 seasons with 75 or more catches, 5 seasons with 1,000 or more yards, and 5 seasons with 10 or more receiving touchdowns. He never played in a playoff game. At the time of his retirement, his 479 receptions were eighth all time. That includes NFL history, not just AFL history. His 8,046 receiving yards were fifth all time. His 81 receiving touchdowns were third all time. When he played defensive back and return specialist for the Eagles, he recorded 3 interceptions as well as 503 combined kick and punt return yards and 1 punt return touchdown. When he left the New York Titans, now known as the Jets, he was the team's all-time leader in catches, receiving yards, and receiving touchdowns. When he left the Raiders, he was the team's all-time leader in catches, receiving yards, and receiving touchdowns. What do we think about Art Powell? It's always hard to determine if a player is a Hall of Famer if they played many, many decades ago. I'm sorry to those out there who may have watched Art play. I know I haven't. I know most of the people on Old Legacy here did not have a chance to watch Art Powell play. But I will respect him and I will respect anyone who got to watch him. And I will give him and everyone else a fair chance in determining whether they should be a Pro Football Hall of Famer or not. So, looking back at players like this, it's hard to look at their stats and say they're definitely a Hall of Famer because it's just so hard to determine that. So, what I do in determining how good a player's stats would be in today's game is I look at inflation of these numbers. So, for those who have not read my article, I have written an article going over what numbers throughout any time period in NFL history would look like in today's NFL. And you can look at it vice versa in determining what today's numbers look like back then. Here is Art Powell's stats from when he was playing, and here are Art Powell's stats if they were inflated to 2022's numbers. Obviously, we can't do 2023's numbers because the season hasn't started yet. So, based off the numbers and the projections, Art Powell would have had about 830 catches, 11,050 receiving yards, 87 receiving touchdowns. So 830 catches, that's a little less than what DeAndre Hopkins currently has. 11,050 receiving yards, that's also a little less than DeAndre Hopkins has. And 87 receiving touchdowns, that is as much as Davante Adams and Andre Reed. He would have had 7 seasons with 75 or more catches, 5 over 100. He would have had 7 or more 1,000-yard receiving seasons. 4 of them would have been 1,500 yards or more, and 5 seasons with 10 or more receiving touchdowns. 2 of them were 15 touchdowns or more. So what I see here is a player who played a pretty short time frame and retired early. But during his time playing, he was one of the best receivers in the entire league. This is an interesting question because if you look at the projected numbers, there are current players right now like DeAndre Hopkins, Devontae Adams, who are around the same statistical measurements. Um, and I don't know if I would say Devontae Adams or DeAndre Hopkins are Hall of Famers at this moment in time if they retired right now. And the thing is, Devontae Adams has some playoff experience. DeAndre Hopkins has some playoff experience. Art Powell has never even been to the playoffs. Now, I'm not going to say he shouldn't be in the Hall of Fame because he was on bad teams. He actually wasn't on bad teams. It's just he never had a chance to go to the playoffs. Um, Art is in a very odd situation to where he has some accolades that show he should be in the Hall of Fame and accolades that show he shouldn't be in the Hall of Fame. I think this is a toss-up. Now, in order to be a Hall of Famer, you need 80% of the Pro Football Hall of Fame's committees vote for approval. And I don't know if 80% of the group is going to say he's a Hall of Famer. Um, I think his prime was very good. His prime was arguably the best of his time. If you look at the numbers like Lance Allworth and Don Maynard during that time, also AFL receivers, some of the greatest receivers to ever play this game, it's kind of hard to say that he is a Hall of Famer because he's never even done anything in the playoffs. And it sucks because there are guys out there like Joe Thomas who are Hall of Famers, even though they've never been to the playoffs. Um, his numbers are really good, but not Hall of Fame worthy because he has not done any of this in the playoffs. Um, I think some of these seasons, I mean, these numbers are amazing to look at. Now, when he left the Titans, the New York Titans at the time, Um, he was the all-time leader in the team's history in catches, receiving yards, receiving touchdowns. But the team was only around for like 3, 4 years at that time. And when he left the Raiders, he was the team's all-time leader in catches, receiving yards, and receiving touchdowns. Again, the team was only around for like 6 years at that time. Um, I don't, I don't necessarily know. This is probably going to be my biggest question mark, whether he should be a Hall of Famer or not. I don't think 80% of the committee is going to say yes. I'm one that I feel like a lot of players should be in the Hall of Fame. That's why I started the Old Legacy Hall of Fame to get guys like this into a Hall of Fame because you can't tell the history of sports. You can't tell the history of the Raiders, the New York Titans, or Jets without talking about Art Powell. Um, I would, I'd say he's probably not a Pro Football Hall of Famer. There was a lot of guys on who were semifinalists for the senior nominee position, and that a lot of them were better than Art Powell. Whether that was statistically, whether that was the awards they accomplished. Um, I find it interesting to look at players who have all league honors more than they do Pro Bowls or All Stars. It's just very interesting to look at because all league means you were the best throughout the league versus an all star, it means you were the best through your conference. Um, it's just very interesting. He is second team on the all AFL all time team. Um, I think that's giving him credit, but there's also other guys on that team that aren't in the Hall of Fame. So for this case, Art Powell, is he a Pro Football Hall of Famer for next year? I'm gonna say no. Next on the list is Steve McMichael, who was a defensive tackle slash nose tackle for the New England Patriots in 1980, Chicago Bears from 1981 to 1993, and Green Bay Packers in 1994. McMichael played 15 seasons. He went to 2 Pro Bowls, was given All-Pro honors 5 times. He won Super Bowl 20 with the Chicago Bears, the famous '85 Bears defense. He has 100.5 career sacks, including regular season and postseason together. He has 2 interceptions, 13 forced fumbles, 17 fumble recoveries, and 3 safeties. Currently, he has the second most sacks in Chicago Bears history. In 2019, he was ranked 19th on the top 100 greatest Chicago Bears of all time in honor of the Bears' 100th anniversary. Second highest ranked player not in the Pro Football Hall of Fame behind Jay Hilgenberg. If you're looking at the stats inflated to 2022, sacks are one of those numbers that there's not going to be too large of a difference over the course of history, whether you're playing in the 80s or now, and determining how many sacks you got. So, instead of his 100.5 career sacks, it would be inflated to 103 career sacks in 2022. Steve McMichael, I have heard so much from players that have played against him and teammates of his. Now, teammates of his are going to be biased. They're going to want every one of their guys in the Pro Football Hall of Fame, in any Hall of Fame, which I respect. I mean, who's not going to try and get their buddies into the Hall of Fame with them? It makes your team look better, the more players that you played with being in the Hall of Fame. I think McMichael was overshadowed by everybody else on that 85 Bears defense and throughout the 80s of that Bears defense. I mean, he got a chance to play with Alan Page, Richard Dent. He got to play with Mike Singletary. There's so many great players on those 80s Bears teams. It was amazing. I mean, he has the second most sacks in Bears history. That in Chicago Bears history, which spans over 100 years, he has the second most sacks. Now, granted, sacks didn't become an official measurement until 1982, but Pro Football Reference and many other people worked together to try and acquire video and try to compile the sack totals from prior seasons before that. And I believe they've gone all the way back to 1960. With McMichael, that is an amazing accomplishment. With how many players who have played with the Bears, that is stunning. That there are so many Hall of Famers, and he is a defensive tackle. Um, I do feel like he has a resume that should be in the Hall of Fame. I don't know if he's got the accolades, the individual awards like Pro Bowls, All Pros. Um, feel like the Pro Football Hall of Fame, as of lately, has been shying away from Pro Bowls being a typical measurement for determining if someone should be in the Hall of Fame. I know a lot of people drag on Pro Bowls because everybody goes, but my thought is if you can't make a Pro Bowl and everybody says how easy it is to make the Pro Bowl, what does that say about you as a player? If you can't make one Pro Bowl in your career in today's NFL, how good really are you? There are players who are snubbed every single year. I do feel like Pro Bowls are a great measurement to determining if a player is a Hall of Famer or not, or just a great player overall. I think that's a I think that's one step in determining just how good you were. It's not a definitive answer. Just because you have the most Pro Bowls doesn't mean you're the best. But all pros, that's a step higher. Instead of determining if you're one of the best in your conference, are you one of the best players in the league? Another situation like Art Powell, he had more all pros than he had Pro Bowls. It's very unique. It's very weird to me that someone would be perceived as better in the league as a whole more than they would in their conference. I think that's just a weird situation. It happens to a lot of guys. But he's won the Super Bowl. He has over 100 career sacks in total, combining regular season playoffs. I really think he's a Hall of Famer. From what I've heard from everyone loves him. Everyone loved playing against him. Um, it's amazing. I think someone like him should have been in the Hall of Fame. This actually shows me that there is one player who should also be in the Hall of Fame, and that's Jay Hilgenberg. So Steve McMichael is ranked 19th on the top 100 greatest Chicago Bears of all time. 18th is Jay Hilgenberg. 20th is Devin Hester. Now, I know everybody loves Devin Hester. I love Devin Hester. I think Devin Hester needs to be in the Hall of Fame pronto. I think a lot of returners should be in the Hall of Fame, but that's another conversation to have. Um, but I think this goes to show that Jay Hilgenberg should be in the Hall of Fame. I think Hilgenberg has played an excellent career at center. I think he was one of the best centers of his time frame, and I think that the '80s Bears were so good. Overall, do I think Steve McMichael is going to be a Pro Football Hall of Famer next year? I think so. Finally, our last guy, Randy Gradishar. So Randy Gradishar only played with the Denver Broncos from 1974 to 1983. He played 10 seasons, played in 7 Pro Bowls, was given All-Pro honors 5 times. He was named the 1978 NFL Defensive Player of the Year. He has recorded 20 interceptions. He has 14 fumble recoveries combined both regular season and playoffs. He has 4 defensive touchdowns, 19 and a half sacks, and unofficially has 2,049 total tackles, but nothing official has come about that. Unofficially, he leads all Broncos linebackers in tackles, but officially he does lead all Broncos linebackers in interceptions. I think one thing to note, I know this is starting off a negative, but hear me out. I think 2,049 total tackles sounds insane in 10 years to accomplish, but nothing else has confirmed those 2,049 total tackles. So I am completely ignoring that number. When looking at tackles, it's a lot harder than looking at sacks. Tackles seem to be harder depending on the film you're watching. Um, Sacks is something that should have been a statistic a very long time ago when Deacon Jones was playing. I think getting as many interceptions as he's had, fumble recoveries, I think those are great numbers. Getting 20 interceptions, that's great for a linebacker. He did play a 3-4 middle linebacker, or he played 4-3 middle linebacker. He played 4-3 outside linebacker. He played 3-4 outside linebacker. He's basically played the entire linebacking core. Gradishar was one of the best linebackers during the 70s. I do think I think his career was shortened a little bit, 10 seasons, kind of like Art Powell. It's above the average for the NFL, but we're talking about the Pro Football Hall of Fame at the end of the day. I think those are good accolades. Having 7 Pro Bowls, 5 All-Pros, those are good numbers. You get a Defensive Player of the Year. I see that as a huge positive when discussing if you're going to be in the Hall of Fame. And on top of it, he helped the Broncos go to the Super Bowl. Um, he was a cornerstone to that defense, and I I think you can't tell the history of the Denver Broncos without him. Gradishar was part of that Orange Crush defense. That Orange Crush defense currently has no Hall of Famers. I know some of these greatest defenses ever, it's taking a while for some of these players to go into the Hall of Fame. Really think it's time that one of these Denver Broncos players goes into the Hall of Fame. As for Randy Gradishar, do I think he'll be in the Pro Football Hall of Fame next year? I think absolutely. I know he played a short time frame, but his contributions to the Broncos' history when the first few years were a struggle for them, um, they were stupendous. They were tremendous for the Broncos. And I think Randy Gradishar is also one of a couple of Broncos linebackers that should be in the Hall of Fame, like Carl Mecklenburg. So we'll see. I think 2 of 3 of these guys are clear and obvious. I think 80% of the voters or more are going to pick Gradishar or McMichael. As for Powell, that's kind of an iffy situation. I think there were better players to have been picked. Again, no, I'm not trying to hate on Powell. I'm sure I if he goes in the Hall of Fame, I would love it. I love seeing more older players get into the Hall of Fame because the Pro Football Hall of Fame was introduced in the early 60s, but the NFL has been around since the 1920s, and pro football has been around since the late 1800s. So, as for it being the Pro Football Hall of Fame, there really is only there's mostly players from the 60s to now in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. And, there's more history to that. There's a lot of guys who deserve to be in it. And I think if Powell were to get in, I'd be grateful. But I do think there are other better players to choose from.